Over the years, addiction has been referred to as an illness, a sickness, and even a disease. Like most people who are sick or diseased, addiction should be treated rather than being punished. People with diabetes aren't thrown into jail cells to suffer without medicine or proper treatment. We would consider this unethical. As it stands, though, we are doing the same with drug addicts who also have an illness or disease. To consider the seriousness of the issue, we will discuss prison capacities taken up by drug addicts, the need to acknowledge addiction as a sickness, and an alternative to prison that don't involve deprivation of human rights. Last semester, I took an online addictions class with Campbellsville University, and I was amazed and astonished at how much I learned about this issue. These statistics not only come from that class, as well as outside sources and research. Let's begin by reviewing the statistics. On Stop the Drug War Online, they say that over 330,000 inmates are drug users. 68% of the federal population of inmates are serving for drugs, and only 7.8% are doing this time for violent crimes. Through this speech, it is my hope to persuade you that nonviolent drug users should be treated for their addiction, not punished. Like stated above, 68% are serving time for drugs. Only 7.8% are serving time for violent crimes. What about the other 92.2%? Let's make room for rapists and murderers and other people violent to society. Robert M. Hardaway, in his book No Price Too High, Victimless Crimes and the Ninth Amendment, makes an eye-opening point. He says, what if an alien, or a Martian as he refers to it, were to visit our planet tomorrow and confront these statistics, that drug offenders are incarcerated and take more prison cells than hard offenders? Hardaway says that our drug laws may be hard to explain to a Martian or an alien, but policymakers seem to have no problem with explaining it to America, since obviously American voters support or claim to support these drug laws. Let's talk cost. In 2001, the average cost per inmate per year was $22,650. The total cost for all the inmates for the year of 2001, the fiscal year, was $29,491,268 for its 1,252,743 inmates. Between 1986 and 2001, this cost doubled. By 2016, it would be $453,000 per inmate per year. How much more can we afford? What about a cheaper alternative? In 2004 report, Treatment or Incarceration, the national state findings on the efficiency and cost savings of drug treatment versus imprisonment, it was identified that treatment was definitely a cheaper alternative. In 2004, this Maryland study showed that treatment was a cheaper alternative, as jail time per inmate in Maryland in 2004 was $20,000 versus the $4,000 for treatment per addict. Now, to reiterate my intro, drug addicts are sick, so why are they being put in jail? We are treating them like criminals when they need our help. Society needs to view drug addiction as sickness rather than a life choice. They need to see it for what it is. In the book Addiction Treatment, A Strengths Perspective, 3rd edition, by Van Wormer and Davis, they make an eye-opening statement in response to all who believe addiction is a choice. Few people, in fact, would choose to have any disorder, much less to be addicted to a substance or behavior. They go on to discuss that MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. Through this, scientists can now look at the effects that addiction has on the brain. Also, in the film Hijacked Brain by Bill Moyer, he says that drugs change biochemical processing and, in a sense, hijack the brain. Through this, the neurotransmitter dopamine is released, and this leads to a cycle. I made this cycle when I was in my addictions class last semester. They start taking the drugs. After that, dopamine is released. Then a feeling of ease and satisfaction occurs. Dopamine decreases with the prolonged use of these drugs, so they stop taking the drug, but still no dopamine is released. So they return to taking the drug, except this time around the cycle, because of prolonged use of taking the drug, there is no dopamine released, or if there is, it's in small bursts. This brings me to my final point. Why deny treatment and punish those who are sick and in need of help? Take the narcotic farm, for example. In 2008, a documentary known as The Narcotic Farm was aired on public television, and it talks about a treatment facility that is now a prison that operated from the years 1935 to 1974. Through this treatment facility, inmates or these addicts were basically tricked by family, relatives, and officials as a way out of going to like a federal prison to come to the narcotic farm to seek treatment and help. In reality, it was no different than going to a prison. They were put into cells much like a prison and were actually beat when they were making too much noise when detoxing and going through withdrawal. So they were not receiving the medical help that they should have got during this time, but instead were placed in a square room and beat when they made too much noise. Then, later down the road, they were offered a way out of being in regular population by becoming test subjects. They began to volunteer to be tested upon because they were offered better amenities, and while they were being test subjects, they were subjected to many dangerous drugs, and they were exposed to these drugs, and then after the exposure they would be taken off the drugs, and then the people who were doing the testing would examine and see what happened when they were going through withdrawal with these drugs. So they were given these dangerous drugs and they were exposing dangerous drugs to addicts and then just taking them off them. So then they were going through withdrawal again. Though, as far as we know, our prisoners are not being treated this unethically. They are still denying addicts the right to treatment and actual support. Let us remember that treatment is more cost effective. Take into account the $20,000 versus the $4,000 for treatment, and then the $20,000 per year per inmate for prison. In conclusion, I have discussed the cost-effectiveness of treatment versus prison, the need for society to look at addiction as an illness rather than a way of life, and the violation of human rights that's done by placing addicts in prison rather than giving them the treatment that they need. On January 27th, 2011, in the video Your Interview with the President, State of the Union 2011, which is on YouTube, the President said the following in regards to drug addicts in prison. I'm a strong believer that we have to think more of drugs as a public health problem. When you think about other damaging activities in our society, smoking, drunk driving, typically we've made huge strides over the last 20 or 30 years. By changing people's attitudes on drugs, I think a lot of times we have been so focused on arrest, incarceration, interdiction that we didn't spend too much time thinking about how do we shrink demand. When we have nonviolent first-time users, are there ways that we can make sure that we're steering them into the straight and narrow way out without automatically resorting to incarceration, drug courts, mechanisms like that? These are all issues that are worth exploring and are worth a serious debate. It's been 2 years since this speech, and very little has been done in ways of making these kind of programs available for drug addicts as for a way out or a different path instead of prison. So what we can do to help is please send a letter to policymakers and attempt to get more programs available for nonviolent addicts rather than jail time, so that they can get the treatment that they deserve and that they need, while also fulfilling some kind of court-ordered program so that we're not just letting these addicts off the hook. Thank you.